Hey, welcome back to Talinn Games. This is part 2 of my Horus Heresy painting videos, and today we're going to be covering all 9 of the Loyalist Legions. Now, just like in part 1, I'll be showing practical, efficient paint schemes that get great tabletop results. These don't need hours of layering or edge highlights, and granted, they won't win any painting competitions, but they will get your army finished with speed and efficiency. Now, in this video, we're going to look at all 9 Loyalist Legions with a quick breakdown of how I approached their signature colours and any shortcuts that helped along the way. Keep an eye out for the 3 varieties of black armour that I'm going to show. They can be swapped between the 3 black legions at your choice. So that's Dark Angels, Iron Hands, and then Raven Guard, in that order. Now I think I've chosen the best one for each one, but you might think different, and that's fine. Let's get started looking at the Dark Angels. Now, before and during the events of the Horus Heresy, the Dark Angels used black armour, with red and boned coloured highlights. Let's look at the first of the 3 black armour techniques. Now, working from a black primer, we're going to do some dry brushing. Starting with Uniform Grey from the Army Painter, we'll do a fairly heavy dry brush, and then follow it up with an ash grey, a bit lighter this time, and make sure you're catching the edges and giving them a bit of a highlight, because then that'll show through in our next step. Give it a coat of Black Templar contrast paint everywhere but the bolter. This knocks everything back to give you a dark black armour, keeping some highlights in place. Technically it isn't truly black, but it does read as black on the tabletop, away from the harsh painting lights. Now, I mentioned don't paint the bolter. That's because it's pretty much finished, just with the dry brushing. Now, I decided to sponge some grey onto the Black Templar contrast paint afterwards, to give it a nice bit of subtle texture. You can skip this if you want, but I do think that it gives an added depth, while keeping that black in the recesses, and also it hides a multitude of sins with contrast paints. If you have any coffee staining or any pooled sections, then this sponging will just kind of hide that, draw the eye away from it, and you won't notice it. Next, we're going to move on to the trim. Not going to take long, just paint it with lead belcher. It gives a pretty decent coverage after just one coat when you paint over black. And then use Mephiston red where you wish it, often in the symbols and the heraldry of the Dark Angels. There's red, so I chose the knee pad, highlighting with Evil Sun Scarlet, and then giving the trim and that red a coat with null oil. Now, for any bone sections, this is my favourite technique, and when I'm speed painting, just paint them white, and then once it's dried, give it a coat of Skeleton Horde. Finally, if you want to weather him, you can use that same sponge, just nip off the end and do some silver chipping. Then paint the eyes in red. With that, our Dark Angel is finished. Here's what he looks like after we finish his base. Next up, we have the White Scars, a legion with shining white armour. We're going to need to get a clean, bright look quickly. Now, over a white or slightly off-white spray, I used Vallejo Grey, which is pretty bright. We're going to give it a coat of Soulblight Grey shade. After that's dried, you'll see it's got a good shading on it, but just needs that white pop to make it read as such. So I'm going to dry brush some Procryl Titanium White to finish off the white armour. Now for the red, I'm just going to use Blood Angel's contrast paint. Paint it on the trim where you want it. Maybe paint half of it with the red, and then we're going to use a different colour for the rest of it. For now though, use some Black Legion contrast on the bolter, and then grab Retributor armour. Paint in some of the trim, and this gives a nice contrast over the white and red. Then use some lead belcher on the bolter to establish that gunmetal. We're going to use a nice bright blue for the eyes. And finally, if you want to give some nice weathering, a good contrasting pop, grab some Rhinox hide, and use that chipping technique from earlier and dirty him up a bit. With that, we have finished our second Loyalist Legion, the White Scars. Give him some basing, and here's how he looks. Now, the Space Wolves are next. This is the Heresy army that I have my eyes on. In fact, I have some plans for kit bashing, but they'll come in a later video, I imagine. For now, let's see how we can make their cold grey armour quickly. Now, over a base coat of black, I gave this model a couple of thin coats of Mechanicus Standard Grey, and then give it an all-over wash with Agrax Earthshade. Now, to re-establish that main Mechanicus Grey, I heavily sponged it over the armour. Then, I grabbed some Dawnstone, and then sponged it over the armour slightly less than I did with that Mechanicus Standard Grey, and then finished it off with an even lighter again sponge of Administratum Grey. That gives you some nice contrast. Now, moving on to the trim, I used Procuril Bronze for a quick one-coat bronze trim, and giving it afterwards an Agrax Earthshade wash. Once more, painted Black Legion on the bolter, along with some lead belcher, some gunmetal. And that just leaves the Mephiston red eyes. With that, this Son of Rus is finished. Imperial Fists are up next. Now, if you paint traditionally, they can be bold, bright, and time-consuming. But we can also get a similar effect quickly. So, over a white or an off-white primer, give the model an all-over coat of Imperial Fists contrast paint. Once it's dry, my favourite trick is to use Reichland Flesh Shade. It might be slightly unusual, but I like the warmth that it gives, and it adds a little bit more solidness to that contrast paint. Then I'm just going to give it an all-over sponge of Flashgit's Yellow, and then a lighter sponge only on the higher points, the edges of armour panels, the top of the shoulder pads and the helmet of Dawn Yellow. Now, this took me hardly any time at all. It was quick and faff-free. Now, once again, my favourite Black Legion is going on the bolter, and then I paint the trim with black. I used Vallejo Model Colour Black because it's got great coverage, and then we're going to do some more chipping on the blacks, both to differentiate them and to tie them in with the yellow armour. So, chip the bolter with Mechanicum Standard Grey, and that brings out the edges, and then chip the trim with silver. And now this is us finished. Take a look. Next up is the Blood Angels. They're all about rich red armour with clean gold accents. Now, similar to the Thousand Suns, we're going to start with Retributor Armour Spray and going to give it a dry brush of lighter gold. I mixed Retributor Armour and Stormhost Silver in equal parts. Now just a light dry brush will give you the highlights you need. Next, we're going to use Flesh Terror Red on the armour panels. Paint the bolter with black paint, and paint in some lead belcher panels to give it once more that gunmetal, and finish it off with some thinned warpstone glow in the eyes. Nice and quick, and we're finished. But if you want to take it a step further, add some silver chipping for some easy weathering. Then just base it and we are finished. Now for the iron hands. They have a simple look that we can paint incredibly quickly. Let's take a look at our second black armour recipe. Over a black undercoat, we're going to give it an all-over light dry brush of lead belcher. And then paint the trim with a solid coat of lead belcher. Now paint the eyes blue, gives a nice contrast to the black armour, and give the whole model an all-over wash with Nuln Oil. Use a big brush because it gets it done quickly, but remember that you will need to tidy up any pooling that you're left with. Now once more we can do some silver chipping for battle damage, and it nicely complements the metallic black armour we have already, because that lead belcher dry brush will shine through under the Nuln Oil. With that, our quickest paint scheme of the video is finished. Next up is Ultramarines. I like a nice vibrant Ultramarine when I end up painting them, on the rare occasion I do. Now to do this, we're going to be doing some overbrushing. So grab some royal blue from the army painter and get some on your palette. Get some paint on your brush, and as if you're going to be dry brushing, wipe off some on a paper towel. But not nearly as much as with dry brushing. You do still need a fairly good bit on the brush. And then act like you're dry brushing all over the model. This will leave a pretty decent coat. I needed to do 2 or 3 coats, but it was real quick because it dries fairly fast. Now once you're finished, we're going to dry brush some Lothern blue just to pick out the edges and give an even more vivid pop to the armour. The white shoulders Horus Heresy Ultramarines often have, I did a base coat of uniform grey and then dry brushed ash grey over the top. This is not true white, but it gives the effect that it is. Now, paint the trim with Retributor armour and shade it with Reikland Flesh Shade. It is one of my favourite shades, if you couldn't tell. That leaves us with our finished Ultramarine. Now, with the Salamanders, we're going to do some overbrushing again. I'm going to be using a recipe from the Warhammer official YouTube channel. We're going to overbrush Warflesh, and then do a couple of increasingly lighter dry brushes. Start off with Elysian Green, focusing mainly around the edges that you want highlighted, and then move to Krieg Camo. Dry brush it, but very sparingly on the edges. Now if you do overdo it, feel free to get some Warflesh on a dry brush, and then just stipple or stab the brush on any overdone bits. It re-establishes the base coat and just knocks it all back a little. Next, we're going to paint the shoulders, the bolter, and the head black. I'm going to paint the trim gold, and then move on to those black sections. Now for the head, we're going to dry brush some Mechanicus Standard Grey, because the Sons of Vulcan all have charcoal black skin because of the native radiation on Nocturne. Over that Mechanicus Standard Grey, do an even lighter dry brush of Dawnstone. While that dries, we can paint some lead belcher on the bolter, then give the trim an Agrax Earthshade wash, and give both the bolter and the head a coat of Nuln Oil. Now finally, we're going to grab some Black Legion and paint it in a thin coat over the head and face. It keeps a little of the highlight and depth, and it knocks it all back, but it is definitely black skin. Our Salamander then is finished. Now finally, our last legion of this series is the Raven Guard. They are sleek, stealthy, and black. Let's see the third and final way to do black armour. Now, over a black primer, we are going to give it a very thin coat of our black paint, so that we can tidy up if we make any mistakes and be sure that we're going to be painting with that same black undercoat. Now, once that's finished, we are going to do some very minimal highlights with Mechanicus Standard Grey. Now, we're not going to do heavy metal levels of highlights, we're just going to look for the upper edge or outside edge of armour panels. Move quickly and tidy up with black if you need to. Just remember, you don't need to be perfect. Tidying up with black hides a multitude of errors. Now, notice here in this panel, for example, I'm not going to highlight them because they've got trim around the edge, and I'm just going to let that kind of highlight that armour. We will do the shoulder pads though. I'm going to highlight them just in the corners like this. Now next up is the trim. I'm going to use Lead Belcher. And lastly, we're going to give it an all-over Nuln Oil wash. This will knock everything back. The highlights will be quite subtle, but they will do their job along with the trim. Now use red for the eyes. Now finally, silver chipping never really goes amiss. But with that, our final Legionnaire is finished. Now that wraps up all 9 Loyalist Legions, every one of them painted quickly, cleanly and ready for the tabletop. Now both videos, I reckon, all of the Marines, took me less than an hour to paint individually, some even shorter. Batch paint though is the key because it will cut out even the drying time waits and will let you do like a unit of 10 real quick. Between this video and the last one, that is all 18 legions of the Horus Heresy covered. If you found any of these schemes useful, please let me know in the comments, and let me know what legion you're going to paint if you start a Horus Heresy army. Now thanks for watching Talinn Games, and as always, keep on painting.